Okay, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you end up watching this recording. As I promised at the end of last term before Pesach, I just wanted to give one more short share on the topic and try and finish off our sugya up to the two dots on Kuf Chaf Gimel on Medalef, a third of the way down, and then in Mitzvah Hashem will start the new term on the next Gemara. So this is just a chance to tidy up the sugya, and apologies for the delay in getting this out. So the Gemara asked a question. It brought a brisa, depending on the Gersa. It first quotes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, whether you can take the ali, the pestle, the katzifal of basar to chop on it meat, and Beis Hillel is mati because of the tzorech simchas yom tov. But the Shobin, everyone agrees, shem katzifal of basar. Once you've cut the meat on it, translation, once there's no longer tzorech of simchas yom tov, then also l'taltaloi. So basically what it tells us is that this pestle, this chopping board, is Muktza. Everyone agrees it's Muktza once one no longer has the tzorech of simchas yom tov. Then everyone would agree it's Muktza. And the Gemara's question is, surely this is a kli melachot issa, which should be mutter l'tzorech gufay, or perhaps also l'tzorech makomay, as per the previous discussion. So the Gemara thought, Soba l'shinui la Rav Nechemia. The Gemara thought that this brisa is going like with Nechemia, who holds that that we don't have this heta of the tzorech gufay l'tzorech makomay. It only can be used, and more than that, it can, even a kli melachot leheta can only be used for tzorech tashmishay. On that, the Gemara answers, no, that we can say that really this is a kli, this is a Muktza machmas to Sar and Kiss, similar to the Chiddush of Rav, that Sichi, Zeri, and Mazuri, these various implements which are either used for dyeing or for weaving, but are Miyachad Yumakum, are Muktza machmas to Sar and Kiss, and everyone agrees with Muktza machmas to Sar and Kiss that there's no heta to use them in the tzorech gufay, the tzorech makomay. In other words, the logic of the tzorech gufay is that every kli is, even if its main use is a Muktza use, and therefore the kli is Muktza, it's a kli melachot issa. Nonetheless, it's a kli, it's a utensil, and therefore it's only made by default for any other possible use. And therefore, if I want to use the blacksmith's hammer, the cornus shalpanim I want to use for a heta use for cracking a coconut, I'd be allowed to do so, because it's a kli, all said and done, and therefore it's made for any other tashmish, that's the head of the tzorech gufay. But we don't say that with something which is a Muktza machmas to Sar and Kiss, a kli which you're miyachid l'hu makom, and therefore, like Zeri and Mazuri, Sichi, Zeri and Mazuri, similarly, this kotzef, this ali shal kotzef, the chopping board, the pestle of the butcher is Muktza machmas to Sar and Kiss, and therefore, once the het of simchas yom tov is removed, it can't be used for anything, and it's Muktza, and this has nothing to do with Nechemia. And we profit from this that we don't have to establish the brisa like the minority opinion of Rav Nechemia. Now, right at the end of the last year, we had some discussion in which I half missed a Rashi. Once the Gemara comes on to this answer of Muktza machmas to Sar and Kiss, is this also an answer for the Meducha shel Shum? Does this also deal with Meducha? Because the Gemara asked for Meducha on Rabbah, why would the Meducha why would the Meducha shel Shum be Muktza? And the Gemara answered that surely it should also be kli melachot issa and allow for tzorech gufay. And the Gemara answered it's going like Rav Nechemia. So then the Gemara asks from the katzef shel the ali shel katzef, and the Gemara answers in the end that this isn't going like Rav Nechemia, that this is Muktza machmas to Sar and Kiss. So once the Gemara says that this is Sar and Kiss, would this also answer the original question of Meducha shel Shum? Is that also Muktza machmas to Sar and Kiss? Now, in our Gersa of the Gemara says, Hachanami miyachid lehu makom. Here also, or Rashi says miyachid lohem, Hachanami miyachid lehu makom. You are miyachid for them a makom. In other words, they are Muktza machmas to Sar and Kiss. And Rashi translates the plural, they are Muktza machmas to Sar and Kiss, to mean Ali and Meducha. So in brief, in Rashi, by the maskana of the sugya, both the Meducha shel Shum and the Ali shel kotzef, both of them are Muktza machmas to Sar and Kiss, and we no longer need to come on to Rav Nechemia, and that's the reason why they're osa. So I don't want to go too much into details, other than to point out that there are Rishonim, the Ritva later in Kuf Chaf Gimel on the base, and a Mashar, in a Tosfos and so on, who have a different Gersa in the Gemara, and in their Gersa, it's hanami miyachid lo makom or miyachid le makom. In this case, also, we're miyachid for it a makom. In other words, not in these cases, hachinami, in these cases, miyachid lehu makom. And Gemara's answer is going on both Meducha and Ali, but in this case, it's miyachid for it a makom. In other words, it's only an answer for Ali, but not an answer for Meducha. So those are two Gesars in the Gemara, and in the alternative Gesar, Meducha remains only working like on Nechemia, but the answer of Chisar and Kis doesn't make sense. Presumably the explanation is because, and the Ritva I think spells this out, as I mentioned, the Chav Gimel on days. The Ritva says because the Meducha is not such a valuable artifact, it's not a valuable utensil, and therefore it's not such a heavy utensil, it's not one that runs Miyachi Mokum, and therefore the answer of the Gemara wouldn't make sense. Now, I didn't have time to think this through in the last year because I think I missed the rush and someone pointed this out to me. If this answer is correct, then it turns out that Meducha is a Muktza Machmas Chesoron Kis, and even so, the Brisa says that when it has the Shum in it, it's Mutter. Which again, let's remember let's start from the top of the Omud and Kuf Chaf Gimel Omud Aleph. The Gemara said that a Meducha Shel Shum is Muktza. Translation according to Rashi's version in the conclusion of the Gemara, because it's Chesoron Kis, and even so, you can move it when it has the Shum inside. Why can you move it when it has the Shum inside? So we saw considerable machlokas Rishonim, but according to many of the Rishonim, the Rosh and so on, the heter is like Kikar and Tinuk. You put the Shum inside, and therefore, like Kikar and Tinuk, you're putting something non-Muktza on top of the Muktza item, and you, like a reverse bosses type of thing, you demuktarize the item, and you can move it because your movement is misyachis, is relates to the non-Muktza item rather than to the Muktza item. In which case we see a chiddush, which we discussed originally then in the name of Rabbi Kiva Eger, that even something that's Muktza Machmas Chesoron Kis can still be demuktzarized, if you like, by putting a kikkah or tunuk on top of it. Let's just spell out what that kiddush means. The whole logic of the non-Chesoron Kis item, a regular KD, is Muktza l'sorich gufay, because even though its primary use is Muktza, nonetheless it's a KD, it's a utensil, it's omade for any uses, and therefore it becomes Muktza for any non-Muktza use I can use it for. So even though it's a hammer that's used for blacksmithing, nonetheless, if I want to use it to crack a coconut, I can because it's a KD. Chesoron Kis isn't omade for any other uses. This Meducha is Chesoron Kis. And even though it's not omade for other uses, because it's chaburah b'mkomo, it's miyachid b'makom, it's Chesoron Kis, nonetheless, if I put something on top of it, I can repurpose it as a tray, and my action can relate to the non-Muktza item rather than the Muktza items. This is a bit of a chiddush that putting something, a kikkah or tunuk, on top of an even Chesoron Kis is a solution to remove its Muktza status. That's what comes out according to if you combine the Rosh, who understands that the heter of Shum with the Meducha is that it is Muktza Machmas Chesoron Kis, and nonetheless it has the heter of Kli and Tinuk. That's according to the Rosh. Now we saw the other Rishonim, the family of the Ramban, the Rashba, the Ramban, and others, the Ranan, I think, and so on, who learned that the heter of Shum is not Muktza, is not that you're Kik and Tinuk, but that with respect to the Shum, when the Shum is inside it, it's like a Klisha Malachtoi Leheta, because you're using it to carry the Shum. You're not using it to crush the Shum, you're using it to carry the Shum, and that's its very functionality, and therefore it's a Klisha Malachtoi Leheta. So in this reading, we see a different chiddush. Even though a Meducha Shel Shum is a Klisha Malachtoi Le'issa Muktza Machmas Chesoron Kis. In our Gis of the Gemara, at least, it's Muktza Machmas Chesoron Kis, like Rashi says. So even though the Meducha is Chesoron Kis, nonetheless, if you repurpose it into a Klisha Malachtoi Leheta, then it's not Muktza because it's a Klisha Malachtoi Leheta. Now, let's just understand the logic of this. Chesoron Kis, according to most poskim, only makes sense with something which is a Klisha Malachtoi Le'issa. Meaning to say, a Klisha Malachtoi Le'issa is a Kli because it's used for something else, so therefore it's Muktza. If it's not Chesoron Kis, it's by default, because it's a Kli, it's only made for other uses, and therefore if I find a non-Muktza use for my hammer, like cracking a coconut, I could do it, I could use it, so that's me called Sorech Gufay. But when it's Chesoron Kis, it isn't only made for other uses. That all makes sense when we say it isn't only made for other uses, because it's Chesoron Kis. But if, and it's not only made for its primary use, because it's also Klisha Malachtoi Le'issa. So Chesoron Kis is like a second layer on top of Klisha Malachtoi Le'issa. Its primary purpose is also because its primary purpose is a forbidden use. Secondary purposes is Chesoron Kis, and therefore it's not made for secondary purposes. But what happens if its primary purpose is heter? Then does it make sense to say the logic of its Muktza? Because of Chesoron Kis. The logic of Chesaron Kiss is secondary uses it's not omed for, because it's only omed for its primary use because it's a valuable artifact. But if it's primary use, it's not Muktza for, because its primary use is a perfectly permissible Shabbos use, then it wouldn't be Muktza at all. The concept of Chesaron Kiss wouldn't make sense there. So I don't know, I have a very delicate, fragile silver cup, which I use as my Kiddush back, I use as my close of Kiddush. So I'm using it for its primary purpose. So it doesn't make a difference. I wouldn't use it for anything else. It's not Muktza because it's omed for its primary purpose. This is the view of most poskim, that the concept of Chesaron Kiss doesn't make sense with something which is Muktza, which is a Klisha Melachta Leheta. It's an additional layer on a Klisha Melachta L'Issa. And therefore, these were shown in the alternative reading of the Gemara. A Meducha is a Klisha Melachta L'Issa, yes. But when it has the Shum in it, it functions like a Klisha Melachta Leheta. And therefore, even though it's Muktza Machmas Chesaron Kiss, nonetheless, it doesn't make a difference. It's not Muktza because effectively it's a Kli Shemlachto Leheta. That's what comes out as the Cheshbon according to these Rishonim. So just to summarize, in Rashi's Girsa, the Gemara is going back even on the earlier part. It's saying that a Meducha is Chesaron Kiss. Nonetheless, it helps that it's not Muktza when it has Shum in it. How does it help that it's not Muktza when it has Shum in it? According to the Rosh, like Kik and Sinuk, and we see a Chiddush that Kik and Sinuk helps even with Chesaron Kiss. And according to the Ramban and the Rashba, it's because with respect to the Shum, it's a Kli Shemlachto Leheta, and therefore Kli Shemlachto Leheta, they would evidently agree with the view of those who hold that with the Kli Shemlachto Leheta, the concept of Muktza Machmas Chesaron Kiss doesn't make it Musa. That's what comes out from the maths of the Gemara, and that tidies up what we left over in the last sugya when I half missed the diuk of Lehu and the view of Rashi. Just very briefly, for the sake of completion, I will mention that there are those who argue, prominent figures. Rabbi Kiva talks about a sucking shel shchita on Yom Tov. Now, shchita is mutter on Yom Tov. A sucking shel shchita is a very delicate implement and is a Chesaron Kiss. Now, you would think that it shouldn't be muktzah on Yom Tov because it's Klisha Melachto Leheta with respect to Yom Tov, and therefore shouldn't be muktzah. Nonetheless, Rabbi Kiva holds it does. So I'm just mentioning that how Chesaron Kiss works is a little bit of a debate. But either way, from our Rishonim, we seem to see that they hold like the more prominent halachic view that a Klisha Melachto Leheta Chesaron Kiss doesn't make sense. This also, by the way, ties into another discussion I think Paul at the time asked, and what happens if I place the Shum on Shabbos inside the Meducha? Would that help or not? So if you put the Shum in on Shabbos, again, there we can ponder, because at the beginning of Shabbos, the Meducha was a Kli Shemlachto L'Issa, because it's a garlic press, and it was Chesaron Kiss, according to Rashi's Girsa in the conclusion of the Gemara. So in that case, would it help to put the Shum in it, and at that point detoxify it? It would cease to be a Kli Shemlachto L'Issa, it would become a Kli Shemlachto Leheta, and then once it's Kli Shemlachto Leheta, it wouldn't be even Chesaron Kiss. Does that make sense? Or do we say, no, if the Shum was in it at the beginning of Shabbos, it was a Kli Shemlachto Leheta, and therefore the concept of Chesaron Kiss doesn't make sense. But if the Shum is only put in on Shabbos, where it's already become a Kli Shemlachto L'Issa, there the concept of, and therefore Chesaron Kiss, there it wouldn't help to detoxify it, and it would be, it would remain Muktza. So again, that's just something to think about, but that tidies up what we left off from last time. Okay, let's go back to the Cheshbon of the Gemara, and there's still a little bit more work we need to do in order to just tidy up and finish off the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Omar Rachin al-Mashalmi Mishmei Rav, Hakol Moedin B'sichi Zei Mazuri to Kopet Alayu and Miyachid Luhu Mokum. So that's how the Gemara answers the question from Ali Shel Ali the Katzif on Abasa and from Meducha Shel Shum. That this is equivalent to Sichi Zei Mazuri, these dyeing implements or weaving implements, as Rashi explains, which are Kopedalai and Miyachid Luhu Mokum. And these are effectively Muktza Machmas Chesaron Kiss, and therefore everyone agrees there that you can't move them. So who is the Hakol Modim? Who is the everyone agrees? Who agrees to who over here? What was the context of the statement of Rav that he was saying Hakol Modim, everyone agrees that it's Muktza? So this is a little unclear. And Baruch Hashem, we have Rashi. And Rashi says, Hakol Modim, Rabbanon T'iflegu a Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbanon who argue on Rav Nechemia. So this is very interesting. In other words, Rav Nechemia said to Chiddush that you can only use a keli for its tashmish, not for anything else. Translation, he holds that kelim utensils are not by default omed for all tashmishim. We paskin that even a Kli Shemlachto L'Issa is mutter l'tzorich gufay, because even a hammer, which is used for knocking the nails in a Kli Shemlachto L'Issa, if I find a mutter use for it, like cracking almonds, walnuts, it would be mutter on Shabbos. That's because we hold all kelim are omeid for every hishtamshus, because the definition of being a keli is that it's there to serve people, it's a utensil, it's omeid for every hishtamshus. That's how we paskin. Rav Nechemia argued on it, and Rav Nechemia said, no, kelim are not omeid for other hishtamshus, for other uses. Hakol moedim, everyone agrees to Rav Nechemia that when he comes to kli shemalachto muktza machmas kesaron kis, that such a keli is not omeid for other hishtamshus. That's the translation of how Rashi learns the Gemara. Just want to point it out because it's something I missed and important reading in the Gemara. Now, there is a difficulty in the Gemara. The Gemara brings the statement of Rav to demonstrate the concept of Muktza machmas kesaron kis, and with that it compares the Ali lekatzei to Muktza machmas kesaron kis. Now we have a double question over here. Number one, what is Rav's chiddush of Muktza machmas kesaron kis? Surely that's the Mishnah on, we mentioned this Mishnah already, and we'll get up to it eventually, in Kufraf Gimel Amud Beis, in which the Mishnah says, the Mesa HaGodol and Yosei Shel Machrisha are Muktza, they can't be used for anything else. And when we learned the Mishnah, we saw that was because these were Muktza machmas kesaron kis. So number one, what's Rav's chiddush? And number two, why is the Gemara bringing Rav? Why does it need to say, answer the question from Ali Lekatzei or Meducha by saying it's Chesaron Kis as per Rav? Why doesn't it say that Chesaron Kis as per a Mishnah? Now in Rav you could answer by saying Enochonomi. Rav knows the Mishnah of Chesaron Kis, and he's simply saying that Sikh and so on are also Chesaron Kis. He's just classifying them for us and telling us that these are such implements. Okay, but what's then the Gemara? Why is the Gemara bringing from Rav to argue that Meducha and Ali are Chesaron Kis? Just say like the Mishnah. What does it see extra in Rav more than in the Mishnah itself, in the concept of Chesaron Kis? Why is the Gemara bringing from Rav? I don't want to go into this in too much detail now, because we will get up to Chesaron Kis in more detail. I'll simply now just give headlines that when we learn the sugya later, we'll see that there seem to be two sort of svaras floating around in what Chesaron Kis is. One svara is that one is makbid on them not to use them for anything else, one's particular not to use them for anything else, in and of in themselves, either because they're very valuable or because they're very delicate, and therefore you wouldn't use them for anything else. And that's why they're not made for any other ishtamshus. And another story that seems to be floating around is miyachid lumokum, because you fix for them a space and you don't move them. Now, these could be two separate svaras. In other words, there's two reasons why a keli isn't omeid for any other shtamshus. Either because it's a sort of fixed to place keli, it's miyachid lumokum, and therefore you don't use it for any other shtamshus, or because it's valuable, stroke delicate, and therefore you're makbid, you wouldn't want to use it for any other shtamshus. You could sort of learn the sugya like that. Or you could learn that they're the same thing. Because it's delicate, you therefore put them in one place and you don't move them around. And the Gemara doesn't mean to say two separate svaras over here. Now, this is a machlokus rishonim, and we will see later that the Rosh seems to consider this to be two separate svaras. There's a svara of miyachid luhumakum, and there's a svara of kopid. Miyachid luhumakum is, it's not because they're so sensitive or valuable, they're not the sort of thing you move around, because of maybe practical considerations of the way they're used, and therefore you don't use them for anything else, because miyachid luhumakum, you set aside a place for them. And then there's a separate svara of delicate or valuable things, which you are makrid on them. And the Rosh explains by Sifri and the like, our Gemara, he says because of miyachid luhumakum. And when it comes to the Gemara later of Yosei Shel Machrisha, he doesn't say anything about miyachid luhumakum. He just says because you're makbid on them. So according to the Rosh, we have an answer to our question. There's effectively two sorts of muktza machmas kesaron kis. There's the Mishnah of Yosei and so on, which is because of makbid. And there's Rav's chiddush of Zeri, Zeri, and Mazori, which is not because of makbid, but because for whatever reason, their importance, whatever it is, you don't move them around. So these are two separate svaras. One is because of importance, you don't move it around. And the other one is because of sensitivity or value, you don't use them, or practicality, you don't use them for anything else. So two separate svaras. In which case, the Gemara is deliberately bringing here from Rav because Meducha and Ali Shalkot, according to this, the reason they're muktza machmas kesaron kis isn't because you're makbid in and of themselves not to use them for anything else, but because they're makbid not to move them, not to move their place. So in brief, two sorts of kesaron kis: Sichi Zeri because you're makbid not to move place, the Mishnah later because of you're makbid not to use them for anything else. And our Gemara is deliberately comparing to Rav because Rav is the relevant Chesaron Kiss over here because it's arguing that Meducha and Ali is the makbid on the place type of Chesaron Kiss rather than the sensitivity of Hishtamshus type of Chesaron Kiss. That would be an answer that we can say if you learn that these are two separate svaras, two sorts of Chesaron Kiss. This works if you learn they're two separate halachas. Again, without jumping the gun, if you look in Rashi later on the Mishnah, there in Kuf Kaf Gimel on the base, Rashi merges the two sorts of Chesaron Kiss. Rashi says explicitly that Meser Hagodol and Yoseid is because Miyachid Luhumokim, your makbid on them, and Miyachid Luhumokim. So Rashi doesn't think they're two sorts of Chesaron Kiss. He thinks it's just two vocabularies really to say the same svara. So in Rashi, this remains a puzzle. Why does the Gemara bring Rav of Sichri Zeri and Missouri and use that to answer the question? Let it bring the Mishnah of a Mishnah rather than Amora, but to teach us the concept of Chesaron Kiss. So this again is something that we'll look at in more detail as we learn properly Sugya of Chesaron Kiss when we get up to Kuf Kaf Gimel onwards base. In Rashi, we just have to answer sort of more technically that the Mishnah of Yoseid and so on, we may have thought that Chesaron Kiss was only a very narrow definition, only very rare Kedim or Chesaron Kiss. Rav is Mechadish to expand the category even to Sichri Zeri and Missouri. And once we expand the category, therefore the Gemara thinks we can even expand the category to Ali and Meducha, and that's all the Gemara is bringing from Rav, just a more expanded definition of Muktza and Chesaron Kiss, rather than a sort of a new halachic principle or type of Chesaron Kiss, like perhaps the Rosh would learn. Either way, we'll get to that later. So I wish everyone a continued enjoyable Bein Zmanim break, and in Mitzvah Hashem on Sunday we restart the new Sugya, and I'll be sending out sources for that. So we'll start after the two dots on Sunday. I wish everyone well. Thank you so much, as always, for honouring me by listening to the share and joining.